Center to today's Lexidem webinar on the topic How to Combat Online Frauds, Challenges and Solutions. Today we are highly privileged to have with us our esteemed panelists. Mr. Arpinder Singh is a partner and head of India and Emerging Markets Forensic and Integrity Services in Ernst & Young. He has a significant experience spanning over 25 years in multi-jurisdictional investigations, forensic accounting, and dispute advisory in India, US, and other regions. His key areas of specialization include risk management, regulatory compliance, AML, corporate governance, and training. Mr. Arpinder has acted as an expert forensic accountant in a number of disputes and is identified as one of the foremost legal practitioners in business law in the Who's Who Legal 2015, 2016, and 2017. Mr. Ranjeeth Bellary is an associate partner in forensic and integrity services in Ernst & Young. He specializes in delivering computer forensics, electronic discovery, data protection, litigation support, and dispute services, information governance services to global clients across various industries. He has successfully helped in major litigations and disputes using forensic technology services for some of the renowned global companies. Mr. Ankush Mehta is a partner in Cyril Amarchand Mangal Das. He has advisory and litigation experience of over 16 years with focus on corporate and commercial disputes and white-collar crime litigation. Mr. Mehta has advised domestic and international clients on a variety of contractual disputes, notably related to infrastructure and construction sectors, employment disputes, real estate, insolvency, and private client practice. We are very grateful to you all, sirs, for sparing your time and joining us for today's session. The webinar is being telecasted live on Latest Law's Facebook page and YouTube channel as well. The viewers can send in their questions via question and answer portal or the chat facility. They will be taken up at the end of the session. Now I would like to request Mr. Arpinder Singh to commence his address.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Ria?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I know we have a very tight timeline, so I won't spend too much more time. We'll get right into it. I think technology today, as we work from home, is a very serious risk. I mean, just to give you an idea, the forensic team at EY, 50% of our team in the last 3-4 months has been focused only on cyber issues. And that was never the case earlier. It was always generally bribery, kickbacks, money laundering, but cyber seems to have taken over as the tone right now. Obviously, when people are working from home, firewalls are compromised, people are connecting on internet through mobile phones, people have taken desktops home where they were not really prepared for that particular eventuality. Obviously, business continuity plans didn't really stand up to the COVID type pandemic which we faced. So we'll walk you through some of these issues in detail. Can we go to the next slide, Subodh? Yeah, so I'm accompanied with my partner Ranjeeth. As Ranjeeth has already been introduced, I won't take more time on that, but he's an expert actually in cyber. So I think it's good, but I'll quickly go through my initial slides and then hand over to him. Obviously, the white collar fraud pandemic is very, very serious. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has come out saying that whenever a financial distress or something like this happens, there's going to be a lot more fraud and cyber and other issues. That we saw that in 2008. We are going to see that now. We're already seeing that, to be honest. Even though we're all stuck at home, we've never been as busy doing investigations or cyber cases. So there is a lot of incidents happening currently in the market. Obviously, if you look at the social media marketers, influencers, a lot of cases where you have people who are actually managing social medias incorrectly, giving okays to certain products, or potentially giving some good recommendations or influencing. There are a lot of scandals currently going on around social media, but some it also impacts companies. Even for instance, when you're trading online, or when a company is going in for listing, or a particular resolution has to be approved in an AGM or a board meeting, and you need shareholders to give their consent, that could be compromised sometimes. So I think it is raising a lot of risks in this COVID time, which may not have been as prominent previously. But and there's going to be a lot of other cases. Even if health sanitizers can be counterfeited, I think anything can happen, and there will be people who will take advantage, unfortunately, in these trying times. If we can go to the next slide. Just a quick analysis of the study. As I mentioned, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners had assessed fraud and the magnitude of it. What we are finding is that, of course, they're expecting a lot of issues around financial statement frauds in the future because there's a lot of stress on companies. So that's one area where obviously there is a more of a focus. Corruption, which is bribery and corruption, it continues to be a risk, as the survey has said. Asset misappropriation is like theft, etc. Obviously, if you can't do physical verifications in warehouses, that risk is going to increase. But that remains, there are many such cases, but the amounts are not high. So I think the focus areas should remain as bribery and corruption, financial statement, and cyber as issues. One of the important things is tone at the top. It's very important for senior management today, the survey says, to take focus and keep an eye and set the right tone. We can't say that because of business compliance and systems and infrastructure take a backseat, because if you don't upgrade your servers, if you don't upgrade your IT security, or if you don't upgrade your software, you are going to face risks. And cyber hackers are very smart. If they find one weak link, whether it's an old server or not an upgraded system, they're going to get in and put malware in and get access to your system. And then paying bitcoins, for instance, is something which is becoming a reality where you will get threats around ransomware, etc. And obviously, Ranjeeth will go into it in much more detail. Can we go to the next slide, Subodh? Some of the things we have seen during COVID, one is data theft. You know, a lot of people are leaving companies. There's no normal resignation process where somebody's sitting in office. There's a full checklist being done. Person gives a laptop. Nowadays, laptops are being picked up from offices when a person leaves an organization. So theft of data and confidential information is becoming a bigger risk. Another thing is a little bit of a attitude in India that, you know, if you have contacts, for instance, or if you have contracts which you worked on, you think you own it personally, but you don't own it personally. And I think that's something which, unfortunately, the risk is still very high. And I think over a period of time, hopefully, this risk becomes lower, but that's data theft. Cyber scams I've spoken about. I think that's something which is there. We see a lot of incidents, if you look at the media, around cyber scams, and Ranjeeth will give a few examples. Counterfeiting is increasing. We've heard about them. I went to a shop yesterday. I won't give you the location because I don't want you all to go there. But there were some products of very high, very expensive technology products worth at 1/4 the price. And the guy actually openly told me, sir, this is as good as genuine. So he had two fakes. One fake was as good as genuine, and one fake was not so good genuine. And they had different pricing. So it's very openly sold. I mean, there's not a hidden secret. If you come to asset misappropriation, I mentioned about inventory thefts, with the fact that internal auditors, everybody cannot actually go onto the site. You cannot physically verify. The risks are increasing. And last is corruption. You know, there is an attitude that we'll do anything right now to get our factory up. We'll do anything right now to start business because we are desperate. I think that doesn't work out in the long run. You pay a bribe or you get into a loop or a hole around this bribery and corruption as a risk, and that will come back to hurt you at a later date. Can we go to the next slide? I'm going through these quickly because I know we've got less time and I want Ranjeeth to get enough time to talk about specifically cyber issues. But some of the ethical dilemmas we see around technology, and I think you'll find that interesting. And I'll just read the dilemmas. For instance, what should a driverless car do? You know, when you're caught between you're sitting in a driverless car, like everyone's talking about with technology, and you have a choice between hurting a passenger and hurting a pedestrian. What choice will a robot take? You know, how will he be trained? Second interesting one I find is around gender. You take banking. So for instance, you have artificial intelligence that decides now based on past history who to give a loan to. Now, could that be biased based on gender or race, etc.? How do you remove the bias? And then there's a mass exchange of data which happens on e-commerce platform. I think the fact that you have so much data, the whole data privacy, etc., is something privacy law comes out in India, but it's something which is a risk. Can we go to the next slide? I won't take too much time, but I'll talk about the Companies Act, and I'll go straight to 2013. I've given a timeline, but I wish we had more time. But in 2013, for instance, was the first big change in my mind in the Companies Act, which spoke about fraud. The fraud was defined for the first time. I think we had cases where the independent directors had a lot of responsibility they had to take. The auditor had to comment on fraud in his Caro reporting, the auditor's report. So I think there was a lot more pressure on everybody, whether it was directors, independent directors, the company secretary, the statutory auditor. And I think that led to a lot of transparency. I can tell you, I've been doing forensic work for a long time. I think the problem was when we were doing forensic work, maybe few years back, we went to a company, they would generally say there's no fraud. But in today's day and age, I think there is an issue, and the Companies Act has definitely helped. There's now a Caro 2020, so it has been revised till 2020, where now auditors, for instance, will be asked to comment on bankruptcies, payments to banks, interest loans, whistleblowers. They have to comment on 5 or 6 lines on whistleblower complaints. So they have to comment on all whistleblowers received. So the pressure is becoming more and more, and I think the government's done a great job on the Companies Act part, I would say. Obviously, India's Companies Act, I think I've seen in different laws in different countries, and I can tell you it is definitely up to date. It is very strict. Of course, the question comes in, how do we comply with it? But I do think I see it changing in the last 2-3 years. I see a lot more governance, a lot more independent directors raising issues. You read it in the newspapers also nowadays, where auditors are resigning, directors are resigning. So I think it's moving in the right direction. If you can go to the next slide. Last slide from my side before I put it on. I think the data privacy has always been there. Section 72A has been there. I think the fact is the right to privacy is a fundamental right. I think the question is the Personal Data Protection Bill hopefully will put all of that together. And I think it puts it more prescriptive like the GDPR. I think it's very important in India to be clear what is private information, how do we protect it, and how do corporates do it, especially with the new COVID. I call it the new time where everybody will hopefully move towards working more around technology, even when we can go back to offices post-COVID. But the reality is there's going to be a lot of data online. And I think this act will really help build the confidentiality and secure the data which we have online. I'd like to hand over, Ranjeeth, now to you on the cyber part.
Thanks, Arpinder. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Arpinder, for the overview. So as I think Arpinder has spoken at length about cybersecurity, right? I think today it is no surprise to say that in this digital world, cyber attacks have become the new normal, and cybersecurity has emerged as one of the top 3 business risks for every organization. Now, while we've seen the adoption of social media has helped people in communicating at the click of a button, it has also made the personal data of individuals so vulnerable that cyber criminals are on the constant lookout to steal this data and sell them in the so-called dark web for the monetary benefits. And what is the outcome of this cyber attacks? It's obviously a financial loss, right? Whether as a result of fraud, being forced to pay ransoms, or whether organizations are being subject to fines through data privacy loss, or through missed revenue and opportunity costs, right? And so just to quote some of the statistics, right? Some of the US companies have incurred more than $600 billion worth of financial losses only due to cybersecurity last year, right? And it's not just your typical personal data, right? They can also, cyber attacks can also lead to a loss of critical customer and employee data also stored by the organizations, right? Another big risk that we see is loss or breach of trust amongst various stakeholders. And reputation, not to say reputation damage, is another major risk where the credibility of an organization is at a loss in the event of a cyber attack. And sometimes the reputational damage can have an indirect impact on the company valuation by eroding millions of rupees in the share market, right? And what we have increasingly seen is that cyber criminals are getting better at exploiting the ultimate vulnerability, which is the humans, right? And this is mostly done via emails, right? Obviously, everyone is using corporate email communication these days, and business email compromise has, as we call it, has become a very, very popular technique used by the cyber criminals to steal user credentials and steal their data. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And I think as more and more things get connected to the internet, the importance of cybersecurity will continue to expand at a breakneck speed, right? And given the favorable business scenario, the cybersecurity market size and growth statistics are likely to further progress as well, right? Just to give some statistics, the global cybersecurity market is expected to develop from the current $120 billion to almost $300 billion by 2024, right? And not only that, I think every year, I think cybercrime damages will have cost the world to the tune of $6 trillion and are expected to grow by at least 15-20% a year till 2022, right? And another interesting statistic is that cybercrime is relatively far more profitable versus the combined operations of drug trafficking worldwide. Another, infamous statistic of, cybercrime. And over 70% of the global cryptocurrency market is being used in criminal activities, because obviously the adoption of cryptocurrencies has grown. Similarly, the adoption of cryptocurrencies also grown in using in various criminal activities simply because of the secure nature of these digital currencies. And ransomware is another popular way in which cyber attackers are using to sort of blackmail organizations. It's become like a huge business, right? And some of the research has shown that a business is attacked almost every 11 seconds with a ransomware, right? And the estimated cost for organizations only because of ransomware is going to be at least $20 billion by 2021, right? And the costs associated with any ransomware attack are hard to quantify, because you have not only direct costs where cyber criminals are holding you for ransom, but after that, as a typical organization with a global presence, you'll also have to comply with various local data privacy laws, and a lot of indirect costs come up with that, litigation costs, class action lawsuits, etc. Next slide, please. And how has COVID impacted, the current situation, right? Obviously, I think the COVID pandemic has had a major effect, especially for organizations, as they have to adapt to a new business as usual approach to minimize the health risks of their employees, so that they can avoid physical contact, right? And most of their, in fact, all of their employees are being asked to work from home using remote working arrangements, and the usage of technology becomes all the more important in this scenario, right? And this shift in ways of working has presented opportunities for cyber attackers to undermine the confidentiality, integrity, and the very existence of the company's IT systems. And businesses are currently facing a huge challenge because of the COVID situation, wherein they have to implement business continuity measures to ensure the safety of their employees, and at the same time, ensuring that there is reduced impact to their business operations. And the pressure to respond to the increased volume of requests from clients has prompted the IT teams to bypass some of their company's best practices around information security, because oftentimes they have to respond to SLAs, and that's wherein we see some of these security things being bypassed. And amid this transitioning to remote working arrangements, many companies are increasingly becoming more and more vulnerable to cyber threats, right? And cyber attackers have begun to infiltrate IT environments. I'm sure you would have read in the news, large-scale organizations in India have been hit with cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. And this has kind of been a disruption to their business, right? And some of the security firms that have done research have observed that the cyber attacks have increased by more than 50% ever since the COVID situation, has evolved, right? Just to share another example, right? I think in the COVID situation, we had the Prime Minister had opened a PM Cares UPI, account, wherein anyone who wanted to contribute to that account could do it either through a digital wallet or through a bank, right? And within hours of that handle being created, there are so many fake handles, like with a different spelling, like PM Care, PM Cares, that came up, which kind of obviously this was a big dampener because a lot of NRIs wanted to contribute, and they, within hours of that, more than 8,000 people got duped because they had transferred money to the fake UPIs. Obviously, all of those were taken down, but I think you can see the impact that this has had on organizations at large in terms of how cyber criminals are so smart in using this situation to their benefit. Next slide, please. So what are some of the popular cyber attacks that we are seeing of late, right? These are some of the top ones, right? Obviously, you have a lot more, But these are some of the very popular ones that we are seeing, right? Malware. What is a malware? A malware is nothing but is a type of software program which damages or performs unwanted actions on a computer system without the user's knowledge, right? And this is a very popular way in which attackers are deploying malicious software through emails or through other means in an employee's system, and then using that system to steal their credentials and get into the company's network, right? And there are again various types of malware, like ransomware is a type of malware, right? Which is like hijacking the systems so the users cannot perform any duties until a ransom is paid, right? And some other different ways in which you can see malware is a spyware, right? Which is basically a software used to spy on a user's system. Or for example, if you've gone to an e-commerce website, you'll see something like an adware, right? Where malicious ads are sent, and if you click on those ads, there is a high chance that either a malicious software gets installed on your computer or your credentials get compromised. Another interesting fact is that the attackers are using software bots based on artificial intelligence techniques to increasingly attack in a sophisticated. Social engineering is again a widely spread technique used by the attackers to play on the psychology of a user, right? And phishing is a type of social engineering. It usually tricks the users into making security mistakes or giving away any sensitive information. So this kind of cyber attack is a little old, but still remains one of the most popular methods today. Even to this day, I think we continue to see email phishing as one of the most prominent way for hackers to steal money by sending fraudulent emails to the company's CFO or the finance team and having them transfer money to foreign bank accounts. Data theft, as Arpinder spoke about, I think it's two different types, right? One can be internal, the other is external. Internally, we have seen rogue employees in an organization stealing company critical data and selling it to their competitors for monetary benefits. Whereas externally, data theft has emerged as again a popular form of cyber attack, primarily because attackers are able to monetize by selling this data in the dark web and making gains. And surprisingly, a lot of organizations do not even realize that they have been attacked until they hear it in the news or see it on the internet. Next slide, please. So what is needed is to ensure that organizations are prepared enough to deal with cybersecurity risks, right? Organizations needs to obviously get out of the mindset of viewing cybersecurity in silos, and a more effective coordinated approach amongst all the stakeholders in the company is required. Right? And too many organizations, what we are seeing, are adopting a reactive approach in dealing with cybersecurity, while the approach needs to be more proactive and predictive to ensure that they are more than prepared in the event of a cyber attack. The organizations need to have a cybersecurity framework that is more tailored to their business needs, like identifying and protecting their critical assets, incorporating security by design in all their IT systems to ensure, effectiveness of their systems in dealing with these cyber incidents. Also, companies need to understand that cybersecurity is not an IT issue anymore, and a cybersecurity strategy built on these lines is bound to fail, right? What is needed is an effective cyber response, which involves all the key stakeholders in an organization along with the board's approval. And there are a lot of tools available in the market, especially related to malware analysis, network security, security operations monitoring. And a combination of one or all of these tools is something which is needed. And organizations will need to build an effective plan based on their IT setup to understand which ones are more relevant for them in the current scenario. Next slide, please. Oftentimes, I think what post-incident we have found during forensic investigations that critical evidence like availability of logs, for timeline or root cause analysis is something which is missing in organization, right? And these hinder the investigation process and also prevent us to have an effective future plan, to mitigate such incidents. And hence, forensic readiness assessment needs to happen to ensure that the systems are ready with the required forensic evidence to perform root cause analysis and prevent the occurrences of such incidents. And oftentimes, when we are involved in doing root cause analysis on these cyber attacks, we have found that key logs or evidences are missing, which are important to understand the source of these attacks. Right? And hence, forensics needs to play a very important role in cyber incident response investigations, and an effective cyber forensics team is something which is needed to investigate these attacks. And oftentimes, I think what we have seen is what we call it as zero-day attacks, right? Wherein obviously you would have invested in a lot of security products in an organization, but even still, we see companies getting attacked, right? What we call it as zero-day attacks. And organizations need to have an advanced cyber defense stack which works across the multiple layers of the network in order to prevent these kind of zero-day attacks, right? Traditional security tools are good in analyzing the network traffic. However, I think there's a lot of false positives that get generated, especially when using these tools, right? And a typical security operations team is dealing with thousands of such alerts on a daily basis, and that it's humanly impossible for them to monitor and remediate each one of them, right? And hence, using a combination of network and endpoint forensics, the entire network needs to be constantly analyzed forensically to ensure that we are not missing out on any malicious activity which could potentially become a major threat, and they are able to avoid any kind of zero-day attacks, right? And obviously, using artificial intelligence and machine learning models, the behavior or the intent of a potential threat can be averted by deploying an effective solution which can detect any kind of malicious activity within milliseconds, and effectively detect, not only detect, respond and remediate, along with collecting any forensics data for future use. Next slide, please. Forensic data. What is forensic data analytics, right? I think if you look at corporate data, it is broadly categorized into two types. One is the structured data and the other is unstructured data. Structured data consists of databases like, for example, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft SQL, etc., which are in a particular structure or have a particular structure in the way the data is stored. And most of the important functions in an organization, for example, finance, HR, procurement, etc., use structured databases to manage operations on a day-to-day basis, right? So why do we need a technology-based analytics tool, right? And companies today, the way we are seeing the proliferation of data, digital data especially, they have to deal with millions of transactions from these databases, and it has become necessary to combat fraud more effectively and efficiently through data solutions, rules, workflows, and help improve the risk management, right? And proficient fraud detection depends upon the mathematical ability in order to use these algorithms, complex algorithms, and able to quickly evaluate large amounts of data using some of the advanced technology tools, right? And dealing with the rising volume of data has become critical with the quantum of electronic records and transactions that have been increasing significantly. The associated threats in the form of red flags or misappropriation have also augmented, and adequate risk management frameworks are something that needs to be institutionalized. So what are organizations doing? So organizations are actively harnessing the power of analytics to evaluate data, certain gaps in the systems and internal controls, especially in dealing with vendors or any sort of misappropriation of money or any data theft, any those kind of patterns. They're using analytics to effectively identify these kind of fraud scenarios. And hence this framework of trying to analyze the data from different databases, whether they are coming from SAP, Oracle, or any other database systems, there needs to be a sort of a solid technology tool that can help you analyze data coming in from these different databases and make more meaningful patterns and give you more meaningful data, so that as an investigator you have a lot of firepower with you in order to investigate these incidents. Next slide, please. And I think the use of analytics is helping organizations sort of sort the important from the unimportant, and analyze and synthesize the data in new ways, that has been helping them create actionable, information. Like, for example, though collecting, managing, and analyzing internal company data as well as external data, such as the data coming out from, different data sources and third-party vendors, right? And creating a repository where all of the above information can be continuously updated and accessed, right? Defining rules that are very pertinent to the business of the organization and running these rules on the data in the repository is also important. And obviously narrowing down to the most high risk transactions or vendors using an algorithmic method for the review. And analytics in the forensic world is evolving constantly and correspondingly keeping pace with the exponential growth in data volumes. Like, for example, real-time analytics and machine learning are now being used extensively to identify high-risk transactions, right? And we'll continue to see an uptick in the use of analytics in fraud investigations. And obviously, machine learning algorithms will use the data generated to identify complex outliers across a variety of data sources that we are seeing these days. And with organizations, the focus on implementing the solutions over cloud, providing greater flexibility when it comes to scaling, adapting, and improvising these solutions in a secure environment is the need of the hour. Next slide, please. And I think the power of artificial intelligence and automation has disrupted several industries over the past decade, as we have seen, right? And sectors where we have seen the greater adoption of these technologies, especially e-commerce, right, which are at the forefront of the AI revolution, have already started deploying robots to fulfill order requirements in warehouses, among other tasks, right? And the use of artificial intelligence, automation, and forensics also has increased significantly, having been implemented to, in order to reduce manual efforts by more than 50% in the regular investigation process, right? And going forward, emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence will redefine the future of analytics as well, to leverage and augment the productivity and minimize the time taken for decision making, right? Using big data technologies and machine learning, companies are developing their ability to train their analytics models despite a substantial volume of data available, and thereby enabling the model to adapt and become smarter as and when they get more and more data. And with 20 billion Internet of Things devices being expected to communicate with each other by 2021, the potential presented for a forensic ecosystem can be transformational. And the next generation of mobile technology like 5G is something which is here and will benefit the Internet of Things with more opportunities to expand, right? Like, for example, it will fuel the development of driverless cars through intelligent connectivity. We'll also see the increase in the customer adoption for IoT, for voice-based services, which we are already seeing, right, in our day-to-day life. And building smart cities or homes is something which is of the future that we are going to see. And obviously, blockchain is another transformational technology which has seen the adoption in a lot of areas, especially the tracking of supply chains, logistics, things like that. There's a lot of adoption that we are seeing where blockchain is being adopted. Next slide, please. Now, as we have seen, right, I think email is a very important part of business communication, and where we see more than 90% of corporate communication today happens through email, right? And email monitoring provides the ability for employers to identify potential risks in employee communications, right? One such risk may be an employee who shares non-material information about the company with unauthorized people, including other employees, right? Such practices mean that at some point the employee could potentially share information that compromises the company's security, right? And another interesting statistic to know is that email is one of the key contributors to data breaches that we have seen earlier. And just to quote statistically, I think today we see more than 6 billion phishing emails that get circulated worldwide. And the major idea behind these phishing emails is to send malicious software, as we have seen, as a package and try to get access to the user's credentials. And email forms a very important source of evidence in regulatory investigation, especially the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or the other bribery acts that we have seen, where we see, increasingly email monitoring is something which is a regulatory requirement. And hence, continuous monitoring is going to help organizations in mitigating the anti-corruption and anti-bribery risk, and helps them in regulatory compliance through proactive email monitoring. For email monitoring also, I think using the latest AI and ML based models is helping employers in proactive compliance monitoring, not only by tracking employee behavior, doing sentiment analytics, tone analysis of an email, and identifying if any company confidential data is being sent by the employees to their personal email IDs for selling off to the competitors. So these are some of the important aspects that we are seeing in automated email monitoring. Next slide, please. Now, another important thing is data visualizations. Right? So data visualization is another important component in a fraud investigation. While one thing is to analyze the data, the other aspect is how you are able to visualize the data in the simplest way to quickly identify the needle in the haystack and conclude the investigation. Right? And these are some of the sample reports and different ways in which data could be represented for analysis in a typical fraud investigation. And there are a lot of popular data visualization tools like Tableau, Power BI, Kibana, etc., that are being used for very advanced visualizations by data analytics teams. And robotic process automation is also being extensively used to automate a lot of reporting from multiple tools and create a single dashboard for an investigator's benefit. Next slide, please. Computer forensics, again, is a very popular technique, being used for collecting data forensically without, changing or, spoiling the integrity of the data from any type of digital media, whether it is mobile or your, laptop, desktop, servers, etc. Right? And forensic techniques can also be used to help build the profile of our internet user behavior to help understand any sort of breach or confidential data or IP theft by employees using the company devices, right? And obviously, mobile by itself has become a primary source of evidence because of the increased adoption of smartphones, and hence mobile forensics has gained a lot of prominence over the past few years. Right? And a lot of popular software being used to sort of collect data forensically from mobile phones, including, from the latest mobiles like iPhones, Android-based phones, etc. And what we've observed is that during mobile device investigations, chat logs from the SMS, WhatsApp, and other social, apps that the users use, this data has become very useful source of evidence in an investigation, right? And the other important thing to note is that most of these chat messages are in an unstructured format. And then there are some custom scripts that need to be built to parse data through some of these important sources of evidence. Next slide, please. What is e-discovery, right? So e-discovery is short for electronic discovery. Again, become a very popular wide technique for discovering electronic data, majorly unstructured data, in legal proceedings such as litigation, government investigations, right, and also wherever any internal investigations where data is mostly in an electronic format. The process of e-discovery involves the forensic collection of the digital data and processing of this data to extract metadata and text, and then running sort of keywords relevant to the investigation and giving the most relevant data for the investigators, which can be hosted in a sort of a web-based platform for their review to find the most relevant documents pertinent to their case. Right? And in most cases, I think there is need to build custom workflows based on the size and complexity of each matter to ensure we are getting closer to the case and trying to identify the right evidence. And again, here, a lot of tools that are being used, right, to help create custom models and not only to analyze the data, but also try and understand the different patterns of data, since we are, seeing different sources of data being used in an investigation. And some of the techniques that have become really popular are like text analytics, predictive modeling, and link analysis, tone analysis of emails, which kind of helps you understand what kind of tone is being used by the employees when writing those emails to help track the case. And from a technology stack perspective, we have some of the leading technology tools in e-discovery are like Nuix, iPro, Relativity, etc., which are being very widely used by a lot of forensic investigators. Right. Next slide, please. And again, quickly going through some of the popular e-discovery techniques, right? Email threading is one such technique which is being used to help reduce the complexity of reviewing emails by highlighting the most inclusive email Like for example, you have a chain of emails where people have replied to or forwarded the same email. We can go ahead and identify the top email in the entire chain and help reduce the manual effort of reviewing all those duplicate emails. Right? So that's what email threading is used for, right? And there is another concept of near duplicates, like for example, trying to identify documents which are textually similar based on the text content, right? And clustering is another feature which is being very popularly used. Like for example, you have a large case and you're not familiar what is there in the case. You want to form sort of keywords in your case. So then clustering becomes a very important concept, because then it will automatically classify different concepts for you and give it to you, and then you can pick and choose which concepts are important for you and then frame the keywords basis those different concepts in a typical case, right? And technology assisted review is another popular way in which for example, it's the concept of machine learning is being used to sort of, let's say you have a set of 1,000 or let's say a set of 1 lakh documents and you want to quickly review through those documents. Then you can take a sample of 1,000 documents, have a manual reviewer code those documents, and then you can use the example of those 1,000 documents and extrapolate to the next 1 lakh documents, so that you're able to quickly go through all the documents instead of spending a lot of time, right? So that's what technology assisted review is. And this kind of technology is being used especially on large investigation matters, which obviously have a code deadline and need to finish within a short span of time. That's it from my end. I think we'll take questions at the end. And then with that, I'll hand over to Ankush.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Ranjeeth sir and Arpinder sir, for such an informative session. Now I would request Ankush sir to share his views on today's topic. Ankush sir?
Ankush sir, we cannot hear you. If you could, I think so. The headphone is having. Yeah, now fine. Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yes. The
Yes,
the
it's fine
headphone.
now.
I'm so sorry. Okay, very good evening to everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for my the speakers who've already given some very interesting and fantastic inputs on the real complexities of today's times, and that there's so much to look at in e-discovery and basically forensic analysis of cyber related issues. I think my job is much easier, frankly. So may I request my colleague Maitri to just put the screen, put our presentation online, please. Yeah. So the topic assigned to me is how do you combat frauds committed using technology? But before that, you can move to the next slide. But while we are moving through slides, I just wanted to spell out certain very interesting tidbits and anecdotes that may be relevant for us to understand in this short period of 20 minutes, that how really what is cybercrime, how really has it evolved, and when we talk about combating of cybercrime, I mean how much of the tools that are there are really evolving with these times, and how much of a discretion is left with us to ensure that we are not we are trying to mitigate the issues of cybercrime. So let me start with this. I was on a panel recently with a very senior law enforcement officer who mentioned that in the last couple of years, and especially now during COVID times, cybercrime has been increasing 100% year on year. That was a little shocking to me. I mean, we all knew that it was happening, but when it was increasing year on year, I can see today the intensity and the exposure and awareness that members of the public, including yourselves, the organizers, and wherever I've had the occasion to speak, everyone today is concerned about, cybercrime. I think this is something that people are concerned not from the company's point of view, but even today being a potential victim of, something happening to them, right? In earlier times, I mean, 6 months ago, 1 year ago, you would read that, okay, there's a credit card fraud that has happened, fair enough. And you would always think that these things would happen to the next person. It wouldn't happen to you. The second example I would want to tell you that just about a fortnight or a month ago, we read in the newspaper that CBI had the Central Bureau of Investigation had filed 50 FIRs and 50 complaints in 50 days in most matters, relating to the issues we are speaking about today. So, what we try and, mean is that this is definitely, a topic of great significance today. And if you are a victim of a hacking, phishing, infringement, data breach, defamation, as the case may be, frankly, the sky is the limit. It's like a bottomless pit on how you can be sort of, impacted. So while we sort of move across to the next slide, Maitri, I just wanted to also talk about, what really is the under the Information Technology Act. I'll be moving a bit, through slides, because I think I really want to get to try and speaking some experiences of mine of handling matters as to, how does this thing, translate from the provisions of the Information Technology Act or the Indian Penal Code or relevant acts. How does it sort of translate or unfold into the real world? How does it, I mean, what happens? How does an investigation happen? What are the checks and balances that the company or the victim should have done, didn't do? How does the law enforcement act? I'll try and cover as best as I can. So as you see on your screen, there has been an unprecedented, reliance on the internet. I mean, today, imagine we are virtually speaking with each other. I haven't met most of my colleagues in 4 to 5 months, right? You haven't probably met many of your friends, colleagues, family members in a long time. And this is the way to connect with them. This is the new sort of virtual reality, at least for the time being. When we were in lockdown in March and we were like, okay, it's a matter of time. And we realized that we probably, today courts, I mean, for example, today there is online hearing, right? I mean, so there is just so much that, things are moving and the world is sort of accommodating to the changing times. But having said that, the topic where we are today is, again, how do you use, the resources at your disposal to deal with issues under the Information Technology Act, cybercrime, hacking, phishing, as I said even earlier. Now, looking at some of the basic provisions of the IT Act, right? It deals with electronic documents, electronic records, digital signatures, and, basically a justice dispensation of cybercrime. We'll come to that as well in a very interesting case that we've handled. And I'll try and share my experience, with you, and it could happen to anyone. Also surprisingly, I mean, you should note that the provisions of the Information Technology Act have extraterritorial application, which means that if there is a network, a computer, or a system that's located in India, but somebody from outside India has hacked into that, the IT Act is applicable again, right? So the sections 43, and these are just provisions, important provisions you should know. There's one more thing I'd like to share with you is the liability of an intermediary. So who is an intermediary? It's any of your systems of messaging or posting online, that you're using today on a very frequent basis. These are intermediaries who are basically the platform for data, who are, platform for information, platform for exchanges of views, as the case may be. Now, I'll just pause here for a minute. While it's not on this slide specifically, I should also tell you tomorrow that, if an intermediary related conversation were to come up, where you are involved, in a particular case, the intermediary basically carries the liability or the obligation to ensure that data that is transmitted through it is filtered. What I mean is that they carry an obligation of, trying and ensuring that, non like political, religious, or anti sort of, nationalistic views, which have the ability to, sort of provoke, a sort of unprecedented situation. They should have an inherent obligation to control those things. So when we did a matter, some time ago, where the intermediary liability was called upon, and our clients were called, and, they were asked that, I mean, because of the lack of filtering, as we were to call it, couldn't happen. XYZ, sort of incident happened. So and so lost his life. So and so, property was damaged. I mean, whatever the case may be. And at that time, senior officials from the very, very senior law enforcement officers, got involved, and we realize how they look at issues like the intermediate liability. And these cops are very, very highly sophisticated, and they look at these things very closely and probably look at aspects of the IT Act that you and I don't even think of. So that's one part of the intermediary liability as a concept I wanted to speak about. Second is on the other means of communication, like messaging, WhatsApp, other sort of chat related things. Now, I don't want to be specific about any mode of communication. I do want to say that the way today's times are adapting, in terms of that we are also looking at cybercrime and the sanctity of the offenses, etc., and the victims. They're also moving towards a time where physical service of summons, of pleadings, as the case may be, what earlier happened, it would happen through bailiffs or would happen through post, are now happening through electronic documents, sometimes even through WhatsApp. So what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, technology, or the advent of technology needs to be looked at sort of from both sides. Moving on, I probably share another interesting case where it was a typical instance, and I probably touch upon where my previous speaker sort of, I think, made slightly touched upon that point. You'll be surprised today that when the focus on your card locking system. So we had a client who we had advised briefly a long time ago, and his issue was that systems got hacked. And how did they get hacked? They get hacked through the car remote. So when the car remote goes to open the door, there are certain waves that are transmitted, and those waves were encrypted, adapted, or breached by hackers, who by result of that could get access into the car and sort of do whatever was required. They could steal the car, they could steal the things in the car, they could today very often you have cars from which you can operate your house, because they are all full of GPS, internet, mobile communication. So cyber crime to that has gone to that level of depth. So that's another aspect sort of I want to touch on. Maybe you can move to the next slide. Again, these are punishments, and I think before the IT Act came in the year 2000, which is about 20 years ago, and sort of the way the laws have evolved, for many of the provisions under the Information Technology Act, which could be fraud, could be cheating, could be theft, could be criminal breach of trust, whatever the case may be, right? There are also mirror or applicable provisions available under the Indian Penal Code as well. So before the IT Act was sort of constituted, people would go and rely on the Indian Penal Code, sometimes even the Indian Contract Act. And so these are the sometimes very relevant sort of provisions that need to be looked at when you're looking at an offense. Because an offense can't be that it's an IT offense and don't have other correlations. At some points of time, you probably have an IT Act company law issue, you have an IT Act issue, you have an Income Tax Act issue. I mean, there's just so many things that sort of can sort of come in. You can move to the next slide, Mitch. Yeah, so this is exactly the case I wanted to sort of lead to, where the Bombay High that if there are any offenses which are covered under the IT Act, you don't need to go to any other law. And that's the point I was making, that while there could be marrying provisions or interlinked sort of conversations, if the provision, the offense is covered under the IT Act, you don't need to go. So it's like a special law that prevails over a general setting. Yeah, Maitri, please. Okay. Now, this is something that happens more from a procedural or practical perspective, but I think you all should know it, because anyone, as I said, could be a victim of a cyber fraud or cyber crime. As simply put, your credit card was hacked. Simply put, your debit card was hacked. Simply put, you were not able to note, judge between a sort of a hacked email, of your bank account to ask you to give certain details. I mean, it could be any of those scenarios. What do you do immediately, right? You must register a complaint with the cyber cell of the local branch. Even if there's no cyber cell, you don't know, go to the first police station near your house that has jurisdiction to lodge your issue. Internally, the sort of the mechanisms are very, very sort of clear, and very sort of, smooth in functioning, it will go to the right department. Okay, and therefrom onwards, the investigation will begin. When there are, IT Act issues, right, with Economic Offences Act issues, where there is fraud involved. So anything above the, value of INR 6 crores goes to the EOW, but again, it will have specialist sort of, departments to handle issues like this. The point in the middle of your slide, that is the complaint on the adjudicating officer. Now, this was the point I was making, that a victim or any sort of, in the case of a bank, any customer who's been duped of money through a phishing attack, cyber attack, as the case may be, from that scenario as well, okay, one can go to the adjudicating officer on the IT Act, who has the ability to award damages and penal action. So we are handling, we sort of, this is a little bit of an unknown part of the law, and a lot of times these actions are missed, and somebody would go to either a consumer forum or under the Indian Penal Code. But very often these are very effective authorities that have the ability, the knowledge, and the sort of systemic approach available to it to deal with issues of this nature. Yes, Smith, you can move to the next. Yeah, so now this is something on counterfeiting and product. Now, as I've said, and I started from the beginning, right? We've been sort of helpless or dependent, whichever way we may call it, on relying on shopping, buying necessities. In fact, what we buy nowadays has completely changed. There's so much focus on that we should have the right internet, we should have the right devices, we should be able to sort of work incessantly and very continuously. So a lot of reliance has been placed on so many of these websites where you probably pick up goods, pick up medicines, as the case may be. I mean, it could be anything, and there are a lot of counterfeiting that is going on, because there's a less and less minimal ability to cross-check, verify these things. So that's another aspect of it's a combination of an aspect of a cybercrime, Information Technology Act. It's a combination of an aspect, sometimes the Trademark Act, and it's a combination of an aspect of the Indian Penal Code. So also, just a checkpoint that counterfeiting of medications also, while it's a criminal offense, it also is an offense under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. And also the CPA, the Consumer Protection E-commerce rules, also have set up grievance redressal mechanisms for issues like this. Yes, Mithri. Yeah. So now I think what we need to talk about before moving into this slide, that cybercrime or issues relating to cybercrime can happen in your own office premises between an employer and an employee, right? It's not really something that we're looking at an external world to do to us, right? I mean, today, if an employee who's in the course of leaving his job, or is in the course of doing mismanaging, siphoning of data, that's another aspect of cybercrime, but it's more to do with cheating and other things. But yes, the computer device is involved, the platforms are involved, emails are involved. So as the case may be, that's another sort of issue, when it comes to these things. Another thing that becomes extremely relevant today from our perspective as practicing lawyers doing white collar crime is is something to do with the fact that today, your emails, right? Where are they? You will say they're on your computer, but actually, where are they housed? They're housed on servers, right? Now, many of us don't know. Sometimes even the courts we've gone before, are not like completely aware of concepts of this nature. So when you have a server, which is not located in India, right? You have a server which is located outside India. I'm not getting into those things, but these are only topics to think about. That how does somebody verify that this is the correct email that you've produced in evidence? You don't know that. You will need a backup. So one of the ways to get a backup is under the Indian Evidence Act, what they call as a 65B certificate, when you're producing an email in evidence, producing any electronic record in evidence. But at the same time, right, if somebody wants to check that whether this original email is genuine, is it fabricated, you can get it from the server. So there are processes by which, these things can come from the server, right? So that's another aspect that one needs to think about. Something else that that sort of may be relevant is when it comes to, as I've already talked about, the intermediary liability, the liability of banks, when I've said and other institutions that house very important, sensitive client customer data, insurance companies, and many other, banking, financial, companies that are really the recipient or the storehouse of data, should be looking at these things with an even more keener and a closer eye. So they are more vulnerable, to attacks of this nature. So, one more thing, I'll probably pause and then sort of, move on. In a case that we were representing an employer, where the employee, siphoned off data, deleted data from his, devices, the computers and emails, as the case may be, while we've sent it to the forensic laboratory to get and uncover this data. At the same time, experts like probably, the ones that we have the panel today with, they're also, I'm sure, have these tools to uncover that data. But that perspective was talking from the court's point of view, that the court will, rely on a forensic laboratory, recognized by the state or the country, uncover and undelete sort of this data. One more sort of another case that comes to mind, that may be relevant is on a particular issue, right? We were assisting a client in investigating a matter, and it was found that a lot of evidence was, through all these chats and sort of other forums. And but when the police began to investigate, they found that this was deleted. Now, surprise of surprises, I mean, when we went to the the cybercrime officials, they sort of said that rest assured, they can undelete and they can bring back everything. They have great relations, and the server is sort of located. So they could easily reach out, cross border, speak to their colleagues in the in the sort of the law enforcement department, in the reciprocating country, and they could get this data back, which really helped our client to get justice and convict the criminals who are behind the the fraud. Yeah, Maitri, you can move on. So again, preventive measures for corporates and individuals. I think, while all these things are important, as has been said on this before, I don't want to repeat, you should invest in your systems. You should, continue to do, continuous checks. You should have some mock rates. You should look at, sort of any sensitive data is being with which employees, just generally you should, sort of try and observe the, the temperament or the trend of the employees. I think one more thing I want to mention is, what doesn't get covered in technology is that human intervention. And, that sort of becomes, extremely critical and important, when you're looking at these things, because it's ultimately the human mind or that instinct or that intuition that cannot be taken away, when you're trying to catch or prevent or mitigate an issue of cybercrime. So, what I'm trying to say is that, it's sometimes that instinctive, reaction that you may have that may sort of land up preventing or delaying, a committing of a cybercrime. Yes, Matthew, you can move on. Yeah. So I've already talked about these things, as I said, because I thought it's sort of been relevant, while we, sort of move across the session. But, in a sense, I think, all I wanted to talk about was, a couple of things, in summary was one that, the more we are doing business over the internet, there's a good chance that, you're probably, needing to be more and more careful, about the actions you're taking, who you're transacting with, and who are you sharing your data with. Of course, needless to say, change your passwords more often than not. Don't change your password to the extent that you've forgotten, what was the last one, and then you're sort of sharing more data to get that back. Another tip sort of that came up more in the conversation of a social setting or a family setting, while it's not related to this topic, is that, try and have a limited exposure on your credit card, debit card information. So, maybe sometimes when you're shopping for, groceries or anything which is a small, value, have a lesser limit on your card. So at best, the exposure that can happen is only to that extent. And the second thing is, again, the Information Technology Act is sort of a great, tool and a legislation that has really done a lot, for protecting, the victims and, bringing a lot of, cases to book. And of course, the Indian Penal Code and the Contract Act and a lot of combinations of those have also helped in, sort of determining, assessing, and finally, sort of culminating in the best approach, be it in terms of mitigation, be it in terms of case law, be it in terms of just, helping the victims out, has gone a long way in helping in sort of monitoring issues of cybercrime. Having said that, whenever there is, as was said by someone I don't wish to name, said that whenever there is going to be a business, there's going to be a transaction, there's going to be someone on the lookout to how does he make a quick buck. So those things are going to be there. But as I said, if we are preventive, we are careful, we can hopefully mitigate. So fingers crossed, and thank you, for the session again.
Thank you so much, Ankur sir, for a very interesting and informative session. Thank you, Ankur sir, for such an informative and interesting session.
Thank you.
So this brings us to the question answer segment of the webinar. We would now take some questions from our audience. So the first question is, how to combat the menace of dark net, which is hotbed of drugs, weapons, and human trafficking? Ankur sir, can you please share your views?
I'm not the right person to do it, but I'll make an attempt. I think when it comes to can you just repeat the question, please, again one more time?
How to combat the menace of dark net, which is hotbed of drugs, weapons, and human trafficking?
So I think I'm not sure how to combat. I probably just reiterate the same point, which is that we don't need to venture into those territories and sort of just try and be as careful and as determined not to sort of expose your details, credentials, data to sort of anyone that may have that exposure.
Ranjeeth sir, I would request you to share your views on this question. Ranjeeth sir?
Yeah, sorry, what is the question?
How to combat the menace of dark net, that is the hotbed of drugs, weapons, and human trafficking?
Wow, that's a very good question. Honestly, I think what I can say is especially when you're going digital, the recommendation from my end would be just be very, very careful when you're accessing something, especially if you want to safeguard yourself as a user or your credentials, right? Especially when you're accessing internet or going onto the web. Be very, very careful when you're sharing credentials with anyone. Just maintain good cyber good practices in terms of sharing your personal information. That would be my recommendation, especially when you're accessing external websites. Obviously, when you're using your company resources, you have some safeguards and controls. But when you're going onto the web and sharing any of your personal data, I think I would caution everyone to be really, really careful, so that they help avoid getting their user credentials compromised, and then which kind of then leading on to other aspects of issues around your personal information getting compromised.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is, how is the issue of same or non-IMEI numbers dealt? Like the phones which are imported from China. Ranjeeth sir, maybe you can answer this question.
I'm not really sure how that is dealt, because I think that's, we've not handled cases like that, because that's something that goes to the, police for the cybercrime investigations. From our perspective, we've handled, forensic investigations of users to collect their mobiles and doing investigations, but we've not, encountered this sort of a case.
Okay, sir. So the next question is, what are your views on the issues of cloning of SIM to know the real-time data, like to know the OTPs? Ankur sir and Ranjeeth sir, anyone can answer.
It's a tough one for me. I mean, I don't think I would talk about it from a cloning or this thing is. It's probably the service provider on the telecom space who probably may need to have these things more difficult or impossible to be cloned. But beyond that, my views are limited. I mean, I don't think I'll be the right person to say that.
That's fine, sir. So a user is asking a question: how hard is it to track cyber criminals?
I think this is the best question, probably that's best answered by the law enforcement. But usually, I mean, when we find these things happen, at least in the more corporate world, if I were to call it, there's always a trail behind, right? It's either as I said, siphoning of data, deletion of data, cheating, whichever the case may be. I mean, I'm looking more, as I said, in a corporate environment. It's not very difficult to sort of identify who's done it, but again, to trace it and to recover the money or recover the property, that probably becomes a second issue.
So sir, the final question which I would like to ask on behalf of a user is: what are the opportunities available in this field of cyber crime and enforcement in this area, forensic area, this field?
Sure. If I can
Sure,
take that.
sir.
So I think a lot of opportunities, I think, emerging, especially what we've seen over the past 2-3 years. Cybersecurity has grown and by leaps and bounds, and I think there's a dearth of good talent in this space, especially on the cyber forensic side, because we are seeing increasingly different types of sophisticated attacks being used by cyber criminals. So there is a dearth of good talent who can really learn these forensic techniques and obviously use their sort of talent to see how they can crack different cases. So I think it's definitely an emerging area for a lot of professionals who are interested to take it up as a career. And in fact, we ourselves are trying to look for people in this area all the time because there's very limited people with niche skills in this area. So I think definitely a very emerging area. And I'm sure, I think if someone wants to take it up as a career, I think they'll just have a very good future in this space.
Thank you, sir. So I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for joining us for this session. It has certainly been an enriching experience. I would also like to thank North Cap University, Vivekananda Institute of Professional Studies, and Ansar University for their support. Thank you to our viewers for joining this webinar. With this, we would like to wrap up this session. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.